Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bay Bolts channel. Today we have to talk about a topic that not many of us want to talk about. I've still got my Stanley Cup Champions hat on because I'm going to live in that moment as long as I can, but this does need to be talked about. As always, my name is Jake Ricker. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Wax. Michael, how you doing today, my friend?
I mean, we're still Stanley Cup champions, so I'm doing pretty good, Jay.
That's right. So, what do we have to talk about today? Well, obviously, with this next season coming up around the corner, it's going to be here before you know it. The Lightning have a lot of guys that are going to be up for contract, and there's going to be a flat cap this year, which means the cap is going to be the same thing as it was last year. The Lightning only have $5.3 million in cap space. There's going to have to be some changes for next season. So, in this video, we're going to be talking about who are the guys we could potentially re-sign? Who are the guys that we potentially might have to let walk? And who are the guys that we could potentially be trading to make more room to sign everybody else? So I think the best place to start here, Michael, is who is going to be up for contract and needs to be re-signed if we want to bring them back for next season.
So this is split into two camps, and almost the same amount of players are in each camp. You've got the unrestricted free agents and the restricted free agents. And what happens is if you give a qualifying offer to a restricted free agent, they are a part of your team unless an offer sheet comes about. However, you have to give an offer and have an offer accepted by an unrestricted free agent before free agency starts in order for them to stay on your team. And free agency this year, just for transparency's sake, is October 9th. So let's run through the restricted and unrestricted free agents this year. Restricted free agents, you've got Mikhail Sergachev, Anthony Cirelli, Eric Chernak, Mitchell Stevens, Carter Verhaeghe, Matthew Joseph, Ross Colton, Alexander Volkov, Dennis Yan, Jamel Smith, Ben Thomas, and Devontae Stevens. As for your unrestricted free agents, Jan Ruda, Patrick Maroon, Zach Bogosian, Luke Shen, Cameron Gaunce, Spencer Martin, Pat Saloiban. I apologize for the absolute butchering of that last name. Mike Condon, Kevin Shattenkirk, and Scott Wedgwood. So a lot of decisions have to be made.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of decisions do have to be made. Let's start off, I think, with the restricted free agents and kind of talk about some of those guys. So I think the biggest name on the restricted free agent list is obviously either Anthony Cirelli and Mikhail Sergachev. Now, I think Sergachev is obviously a guy you're definitely going to bring back. That's not a guy you're going to let walk. So you look at Sergachev, well, what kind of contract is he going to get? Michael, we kind of talked about this before we started recording. You were saying a comparable contract is probably going to be in that $5 million range. Now, the question is, we don't know what kind of negotiation tactics JBB is going to use and what kind of, is Sergachev going to want to take that, there's the Florida no state tax, there's maybe a championship tax, so to speak, as, maybe you can get him a little cheaper because you can say, hey, we just won the Stanley Cup, let's go back and do it again. So what kind of contract do you expect for a guy like Mikhail Sergachev?
Well, you look at the free agent frenzy that was the summer of 2019, and there were tons of RFAs that got those contracts that you just mentioned, the one that's in the $5 million range. People like Zach Werenski and Charlie McAvoy got a contract within the $4.5 to $5 million range. I fully expect Sergachev to get something like a 3-year, $4.5 million contract. But as I said to you before we started recording, anything that is between 3.75 and 4.5 average annual value, you sign that contract immediately. If Sergachev asks for 5, that hurts a little bit more. So you try to negotiate that down. But, you talked about the state tax. You talk about the championship tax that Tampa might be able to, leverage on Sergachev. I think those two things are really a possibility in trying to get this cap hit as low as possible.
Absolutely, and hopefully, if we can get him for, that $4 million mark, I mean, that would be ideal, I think. But, we'll have to see, what happens here. The next guy I want to talk about when it comes to restricted free agents, actually, is Anthony Cirelli. Cirelli, I think, is an interesting position for the Lightning because there's a couple ways you look at it. Obviously, Cirelli is one of our best penalty killers. He's is a great forward as well, just in general. He's a great player. He struggled a little bit in this postseason, but we won a Stanley Cup, so who really cares at the end of the day? But we have a lot of center depth. That's one of our strongest positions for the Lightning. And you look at a guy like ABB, who is more than likely going to be able to play for the Lightning next season. He is also a center. So if there's any position that you can give up, and we'll talk about this a little more when we talk about guys who potentially get traded, if Cirelli is wanting a big contract, you can't get him on the state tax or the championship tax, all that good stuff. Is he a guy that you maybe, if he gets offer sheeted, which he probably might because he's a very good player, as we mentioned, is that a guy you potentially let walk, take the draft picks, and then use the cap space elsewhere for other players?
I mean, I sure hope not, because I really do like Anthony Cirelli. He's a fantastic player, and we saw that when he was put fourth in Selke voting this year as just a 22, 23-year-old. So do I love the fact that he's a restricted free agent coming off a career year? No, not really. But if there's one thing that JBB has learned from Steve Yzerman, players have a limit. You look at Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos, and Andrei Vasilevsky. They were at the top of their respective positions, and they only got so much. None of them eclipsed $10 million. You look at someone like Victor Hedman, who was the best defenseman in the world right now. At the time, he was still a very good defenseman. He's on one of the best contracts in the league right now. I think with Braden Point's contract negotiation last year, getting that bridge deal that only pays him $6.75 million, Cirelli is not going to reach that threshold. If another team wants to pay him more than that, that's fine. You know what? I love Cirelli. We'll take the picks instead. But I think that they're going to look at Cirelli and say, man, you're not a 90-point guy. You're not even a 60-point guy. You're a fantastic player, but you can't get those types of contracts that someone like, maybe you can get the Gord contract, but you can't get a contract like a Stamkos or a Point gets. And if someone else wants to pay you that, we'll let you go to that team instead.
Right, and just for reference, Cirelli had 16 goals, 28 assists, and 44 points this year. And in the playoffs, he had 3 goals, 6 assists, and 9 points. So a good year for absolutely, what the role he fits in for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I think something that Lightning fans need to realize is the harsh reality is there could be some very good players that we have that could potentially have to leave the team. That's just the way it is. That's the business of hockey, especially in the pandemic situation that we're in. So Cirelli is a guy that I would hate to see leave, just like you said. But if someone offers him that big contract and we just can't afford to take it, got to take the draft picks. Especially, and I'm only saying that because our center depth is so good. If we didn't have as much center depth as we had, I think that's a completely different situation. Michael, before we move on to the unrestricted free agents, is there any other restricted free agents that you want to talk about?
Well, just to run it down a little bit, I think a lot of people understand that Eric Chernak is probably going to come back. I think his contract is going to be something in the $1.5 million range to the $2.25 million range. And if it's higher, I think you'll see more years tacked onto it. And he's a great defenseman, right-handed shot. I think that is what that's going to be. Mitchell Stevens, Carter Verhaeghe, Matthew Joseph, you probably will see them get something along the lines of $800,000 to maybe $1 million, but I don't think they'll get that if they decide to tack on a second year. You might see them get $1 million. Ross Colton, who I think could be the fourth line center, is going to get a $700,000 contract. Same thing with Volkov, Jan, Smith, if they decide to bring them back. And I really don't think that the Lightning are going to tender a contract to Devontae Stevens or Ben Thomas, but if they do, they'll be a $700,000 player as well.
And the good news is, at least for those guys, those are relatively cheap deals. Now, obviously, those things add up, but those are a lot easier to get under the cap. when working with everything else. When you're trying to deal with guys like Sergachev and Sorelli, who are up in the $5 million ranges, $4 million ranges. So a lot of good players that we can potentially bring back. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But let's talk about the unrestricted free agents. And again, a lot of interesting things to look at here. So I'm looking at the list here on Cap Friendly. Let's start it off, I think, with Kevin Shattenkirk. Now, Kevin Shattenkirk is an interesting situation because, remember, he was bought out by the New York Rangers. So he's already getting paid by them still, which is why the Lightning were able to sign him with such a cheap deal before. Is Kevin Shattenkirk a guy you want to bring back next year for the Tampa Bay Lightning?
Yes, but also I want to put an asterisk because Kevin Shattenkirk, for as much as he is a dynamo offensively, is such a frustrating player defensively. Like, he made so many baffling decisions either during the Stanley Cup playoffs themselves or during the Stanley Cup finals. I would love to have him back as the third pair guy. I thought he excelled tremendously with Mikhail Sergachev on that third pairing, especially early in the 2019-2020 season, which was that's over a year ago at this point. Do I want to bring him back? Yes. If that contract is less than league minimum, no. I'm going to be honest. He signs for the minimum or he leaves, which is, I think, more power to him. He's won that cup already. If he wants to go get paid, go get paid.
I do think that you might be able to get Shattenkirk for that, that cheap deal, just because, again, we talk about state tax, championship tax, and he's getting paid by the Rangers still from that buyout. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Lightning be able to bring him back for cheap, and if you can do that, that's great. So that's one nice thing I think the position the Lightning are in, being able to sign some of these guys for relatively cheap from the buyouts. But another unrestricted free agent I want to talk about is Patrick Maroon. I think he's another interesting scenario because Patrick Maroon is a two-time Stanley Cup champion now, back-to-back. He brings a lot of grit to this team, and he does bring a little bit of a leadership role. Obviously, he has the two Stanley Cup champions in back-to-back years, so there is some leadership that he can bring to those young guys that have it. Like when you bring up a guy like ABB, Patrick Maroon is that type of guy that maybe can help elevate him further in the postseason if we get back to that point. So now Patrick Maroon, with the cap space, are we going to be able to bring him back? Do you want to bring him back? Michael, your thoughts?
I got to be honest. I think Patrick Maroon is probably going to leave. And you know what? If he gets signed by another team, congratulations, you won the 2021 Stanley Cup. Because that is the effect that Patrick Maroon seems to have on those teams. But, I just don't see a place for him anymore. And I know that, all the media pundits will be like, oh, but the Lightning and their toughness, and that's how they won the Cup, and that's why they got swept in the year before. But, Patrick Maroon, for as tough as he was, made some boneheaded decisions in the playoffs. Just decisions that, if this was the regular season, I probably would have seen him get benched or scratched in a game or, for the next game. He is a great locker room guy. He's a great presence, very physical on the ice, but his feet just aren't there anymore. And we saw that evidently in the playoffs because he had such a long layoff and he was dead by the end of the playoffs. I think a lot of people were, but him specifically. And I just don't know if he's going to be that guy anymore, especially with the cupboard so full of prospects. So if I had to make a decision, I would say no.
Right, and it's a tough one, obviously. I think, again, it goes back to, you're going to hear us say this a lot, but it's the truth. What kind of contract can you get him? If he's willing to take that cheap contract, yeah, absolutely, bring him back, why not? But if he's going to want, upwards of close to $2 million, even 1.5, that's probably too much money. So, it's going to be up to JBB and what he can do with those contract negotiations. And also, just for reference, Patrick Maroon in the regular season had 9 goals, 14 assists, and 23 points, which isn't too bad for the position that he plays. In the playoffs, he had 1 goal, 5 assists, and 6 points, which, again, not too shabby. So we'll have to wait and see what the Lightning will be able to do in their negotiations, and if we're lucky, we can bring him back. He's already embraced that Florida man culture. I'll put up the picture right now at the celebration. He loves it here, obviously, so maybe we can get him back for a cheap deal. But let's see. What other unrestricted free agents do we need to talk about before we move on? I think one more I think we need to talk about real quick is Zach Bogosian. I think he's kind of an interesting one. He's a guy we brought in on a cheap deal from the Buffalo Sabres. Bogosian wasn't a terrible little defenseman. We can be real quick on this, but I wouldn't mind bringing Bogosian back again as well. He's got a wicked slap shot, and it seemed like he played very well with Tampa Bay after leaving Buffalo.
Well, yeah, you look at the 2018-2019 offseason after that season had occurred. I know you wanted to keep this quick. This is going to be quick. But he got hip surgery, and he was not fully recovered. It was the same hip surgery that Brayden Point had. And so in the 2019-20 season, he looked absolutely terrible for the Sabres. Comes to Lightning, does not impress for the first couple of games, I'm going to be honest. And the fact that his cap hit was $1.3 million means that I believe he got somewhere in the range of $400,000 to $500,000 to be basically a ninth defenseman. After the pause, he was able to, heal from the surgery, which is something that we talked about with players being able to heal with the pause in effect. And he looked fantastic in the playoffs. He looked so good as Victor Hedman's defense partner, and he made a couple of defensive mistakes in the finals that were really bad. But as far as, do you bring him back? Sure, as a 6'7" guy, as a league minimum contract, or maybe an $800,000 contract, you bring him back, and, some days you compare him with Hedman, some days you compare him with Sergachev, some days you compare him with McDonough. He fits perfectly with all three of those guys.
Yeah, I think Bogosian is a guy you can get for relatively cheap, and he, from what I saw from him in that second half of after the pause, basically he looked good. I think he proved that he can continue to play here if the price is right, obviously. So let's move on and talk about probably the hardest part, and that's what players might have to be on the move to re-sign some of these other guys. Because as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Lightning only have $5 million in cap space. Sergachev is probably going to take up 90% of that just right there. So already, you start signing those depth guys as we talked about, and you're already up to your $5.3 million cap space. And if you're going to try and sign guys like Cirelli, you need more money. So, Michael, I'm going to put the question to you first, and then I'll talk about who I think could get traded. If there's a guy that's going to be off of this roster next year to make room for guys like Cirelli, who is it?
One final point on the unrestricted free agents. I would love to see Jan Rutta back at Lightning in one.
I agree.
Just going to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
League minimum, though. Can't really afford anything else. But
the league minimum contracts.
All the league minimum contracts. So who do I think is going to be traded? It's tough because you've got basically a group of four guys, and they're all forwards. You've got Johnson, you've got Killorn, you've got Palat, and you've got Gore. They're sort of the big money guys that are putting up big money points. I think Gord is going to stay because he was so good in the playoffs.
He was great.
I think a lot of people in popular, Lightning fandom would say that, Killorn and Johnson are gone. I think Killorn is gone 100%. I don't know about Tyler Johnson because I don't know who's going to take him. And the fact that he's got a full no-trade clause does not help. So, you mentioned that a lot of these guys have clauses in their contract. Killorn's the only one that's moving to a modified of one of those clauses. I think what we could see, as my final point, is, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, on the defensive side of things, you could see Ryan McDonough off the Lightning. I don't know if that's going to happen. I know he's got a full no-trade clause, but I think it is a very, very real possibility that you look at dealing him and, figuring things out from there, bumping up Sergachev's spot. I will say also, as my final point, in the offseason, you can go 10% over the salary cap. So I believe that is $8.3 million over the salary cap during the offseason. It's just when the 2020-2021 season starts, you have to be cap compliant. So the Lightning have time. It's just, will they be at a disadvantage at any point during the season?
Right. And just for reference again, for Yanni Gourde, in the regular season, he had 10 goals, 20 assists, and 30 points. In the playoffs, he had 7 goals, 7 assists for 14 points. That's fantastic. I love that from Yanni Gourde. And again, I go back to the grit. Yanni Gourde's another one of those players. He's a feisty guy. You start shoving a glove in his face, he's going to come at you and throw a punch right back at you. So Yanni Gourde is a great, gritty player. I like him a lot. I would like to see him back as well. Killorn, I love Killorn, man. I know he's a fan favorite as well. He's been so great with, just the Tampa Bay Lightning culture as well. So I would hate to see him go, but he's definitely a possibility. The guy I look at, though, when I look at this list is Tyler Johnson. Tyler Johnson at $5 million. I like Johnson as a player. I really do. He struggled this postseason. Wasn't the best. But, again, somebody's got to go. Somebody's going to have to move off this list. And Johnson at $5 million, I think is a possibility. But the problem is, and you mentioned this, is those no movement clauses. I think it really comes down to who's willing to waive their no trade / no movement clause, whatever it may be, to go to a different team. Because if JBB is sitting there and has a potential deal for Johnson and Killorn, let's say, and Johnson doesn't want to waive it, but Killorn is willing to waive it, then you've got to deal Killorn at that point. So, a lot of this depends on what teams are going to be offering. Are they going to offer for a guy like Johnson? Are they going to offer for a guy like Killorn? Who knows? Maybe even Palat. As much as I hate to say that, if that's the situation, these no movement clauses make it a lot more difficult. So I think a lot of it depends on who's willing to waive their no movement clause and what kind of deals they can get. But if I had to pick anybody, I think it's Tyler Johnson. With that $5 million price tag, he would be a decent piece because again, he's a center as well. So there's a lot of guys that can easily slot in there and fill in his spot. So, guys, that was a lot of information there for you. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode. Michael, before I wrap this up, anything else you want to add?
No, and you mentioned if Killorn is willing to waive, there are some teams he doesn't have to waive for. He's given a trade list.
I
think
14
it's 15,
teams.
20 teams that he doesn't have to, that he has to say whether or not he wants to go to.
16 teams.
16, thank you. That he basically says, no, I don't want to go. The other ones, no, he can go. Like, he can get traded to those teams, no problem. So it's not, if everybody on the team had no movement clause, or excuse me, if everybody on the team had modified no trade clauses, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion because it would be a little bit easier to do. But because Palat, Gourde, Johnson, McDonough, those guys all have full no trade clauses, that's the reason this discussion is so important.
Right. Yeah, I think Johnson's the most likely to go, but again, that trades, maybe it's Killorn just because he has that, modified no movement clause. So we'll have to wait and see. But I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like down below. Let me know in the comments down below who you think might get moved out. Who do you want to see come back in a Lightning uniform for next year? Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot of exciting things coming your way very soon, so be sure to stay tuned for all that. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, the Tampa Bay Lightning are your 2020 Stanley Cup champions.
Go Bolts.